Welcome to our session this evening. My name is Sediko Rakolote, the founder and the trustee of the Progressive Socio-Economic Investment Institute. Our institute is a trust established for public benefit activities. And one of the activities that we are doing is education. The other one is socio-economic development. In education, our focus during this COVID-19 lockdown, we focus on organizing webinars, focusing on various topics. We held so many discussions up to date, and today we have decided to look at a topic that has been around. There has been some debates in the public service on the issues of political intervention versus political interference. Politicians have been accused for interfering with administration, and politicians sometimes, some of them, have been saying that is not interference. Sometimes, whatever they're doing sometimes is political intervention. Colleagues, today, we are so fortunate to have amongst us a speaker who was born in Misty Mount outside Libode in the Mpondo Kingdom. He was raised in a very strong Christian family. He was born at the height of the apartheid regime. The ill treatment of his fellow men and women inspired him to thirst for knowledge and wisdom and strategy to contribute towards the liberation of his fellow people. Hence, he joined the ANC from a tender age. The person that we are hosting today, has a diploma in youth development from Unisa, completed a certificate in basic and advanced project management with the University of Port Elizabeth, and is currently studying towards a degree in political leadership and citizens with Unisa, which includes political evolution of African states, the politics of contemporary Africa, communication and business management. He has worked for government in various departments, starting with Department of Education, Office of the Premier, the Sports, Rec, Arts and Culture, Local Government, Traditional Affairs, and Social Development. He has occupied position as an MEC in the Eastern Cape, and currently he's serving as a deputy speaker in the provincial legislature of the Eastern Cape. A selfless leader, a person who's always available to assist, a person who's always available to be engaged on various topical issues. We are so humbled to have him today to present to us on this topic of political interference versus political intervention in public service. Colleagues, we are fortunate to have with us the Deputy Speaker of the Provincial Legislature of the Eastern Cape, Honorable Mlibo Qoboshiyane. We welcome you, Mthatha Qoboshiyane, and without a waste of time, we'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible from the colleagues, and I must take this opportunity this evening. Chairperson, can you confirm whether I'm clear from your side?
You are very clear.
Very audible. Thank you very much. Good evening to you, Sediko, and good evening to those who have already connected in this important discussion and conversation. Of course, I'm not the person who is possessing an authority to understand exactly what the task at hand, but I'm also just going to contribute to the legal knowledge that I've been privileged to work in the environment of both public administration as well as political executing authority. And I must indicate also that the entire trustees of this important platform, Socio-Economic Investment Institute, thank you very much for extending this invitation so that we can navigate through this very delicate, quite story. And I've been invited here to share my thoughts about this complex and quite interesting subject, and which is, I think, Chapter 10 captures it well, especially Section 195, subsection 1 of the Constitution of South Africa, which states that the public administration must be governed by democratic values and principles enshrined in the Constitution. And that's where I will be pigeonholing my entire discussion on the issues of law, constitution, and policy. And I think the whole issue of achievement of post-1994 and principles enshrined in this same Constitution, public service, there are some notable challenges, Chairperson, of the public service in other areas. And I think there is anecdotal, if I may say, evidence that sometimes there is animosity between the administration as well as political office regarding the separation of powers. I think I'll be walking through this discussion on the issue of intervention in display, taking of power, assuming of authority, determining of the decision, imposition of conditions, as well as how to monitor compliance. For me, I believe those are the interventions that the Constitution, the law and policy is dictating of how to do it within the parameters of the constitutional order, as well as the issues of interference, which I can term as an intrusion, a possibility of illegal hindering, a destructive interference versus the proactive interference, which I believe as this discussion is going to unfold, we must be in a position to maintain whether there is a possibility of maintaining a healthy balance between the two, whether there is a chemistry of the conflation of this kind of arrangement, where there is a coherence of management, political management, how then this interface, this political as well as administrative dichotomy is going to converge. The issues of human element, the functionality and the roles that the executing authority on the other side, as well as the political administrative head, whether it's a director general, whether it's HOD, whether it's a municipal manager, what this whole intention is well packaged. And I think you requested me to share some of these few insights about this constitutional order, about this public administration that must be governed by the democratic values and principles as enshrined, and notwithstanding, of course, the issues that I've already cited. I think whilst there is a thin line, Chairperson of the session, between political interference and political intervention in the public service, I think with your experience in the public service, possibly yourself, you are one of those suitable individuals and those that have been connected of how then are we going to constitute this new arrangement, this new order, and how then are we going to massage and manage the issue of political intervention? What kind of pieces of legislation governing political intervention, as the question seeks to suggest? And what are the issues of prohibition of political interference? And I think we are going to elaborate on the relationship and the role of political heads in particular, as well as administrative heads in the public sector. I think the architecture of our constitution, Chair, and various accompanying legislation governing the public sector include its day-to-day administration. They are crafted, or they are there as if we have to understand exactly what this whole topic is all about. Various chapters of the Constitution, which, by the way, is the supreme law of the land, are dictated by the provision detail on how various spheres of government, including arms of state, are constituted. And I think what is important, as we are all in this theater of understanding this interference versus intervention, we must be in a position to delineate these functions and roles. And I think the moment those individuals are able to identify what is the role that I'm supposed to play, what is the responsibility that has been bestowed upon, the roles in many cases will be performed by either political head or administrative, as well as or accounting officer. The Constitution, Chairperson, goes on further to elucidate intervention mechanisms that each sphere or arm of state can undertake when needed. For example, I will cite Section 139, which is an issue in South Africa. 139 of the Constitution states clearly when the provincial government must intervene in a local government, painting crystal clear scenarios that could lead to such an intervention. And there is a distinct feature of this piece of legislation, intervention. This means interventions are also legislated or underpinned by policy prescripts. Intervention is not only left to the discretion of the political office bearer. It could be done within the confines of the Constitution, the confines of the relevant applicable pieces of legislation, applicable policy, as well as standing rules, if we were to refer to the legislative sector. Interference, as I want to also demonstrate, could then be defined as any that the political leaders heading an institution, be it in a municipality, department, provincial executive, performs outside at times the parameters of prescribed legal as well as policy processes. And that is what I think I will explain in detail and deeper in the few slides after this. And let me start by intervention versus interference, which is a key strategic thrust of why I'm invited to share this important evening with you. Honorable Program Director, maybe at this juncture, I must look at the meaning of these two words and their application. This exercise, in my honest view, will help us to navigate today's topic for discussions of which its crux is about the two keywords. I've tried to check how the formulation and the invention of this term, a reminder or a development of a common understanding regarding their meaning and the use, will play a greater deal in today's discussion. I've tried to look at the intervention, whether in the political theater, political space, in the discourse of civility. The interventions come from a Latin word, which I believe is intervenire, which is meaning, and I quote, to come between, interrupt, close quote. Often an intervention is intended to make things better. The intention when you say, I want to intervene, whether you're using section 139, section 100 to a department, taking over by national, we have seen in Northwest, national government taking over certain functions, but the intention of that work must always to improve the conditions from where they were and better them for the future. And interference, according to my understanding, prevent from continuing or being carried out properly. I will demonstrate. This is just an Oxford English Dictionary explanation. Prevent from continuing or carrying out properly. The provisions of the Constitution, Chairperson, political interventions versus political interference. Chapter 4, for instance, speaks to Parliament. The legislative authority of the Republic of South Africa is vested in national parliament. And I think this is well set out in section 44 of the Constitution. Parliament is also empowered to exercise its oversight responsibilities to national government, executive members, including the president. Parliament can intervene, underlined, as stated in section 44, subsection 2 of this same Constitution, by passing legislation in accordance with section 76, subsection 1, with regard to matter falling within the functional area listed in Schedule 5, and it is necessary. Then this is what the Constitution calls for intervention to maintain national security. This cannot be delegated to any other sphere. It's a responsibility of the national government. It's a responsibility of national parliament to ensure that we oversight these kinds of elements. National security, those that are within the boundaries of the Republic must feel safe. They must feel be protected. The resources of this country must always be looked after. And the terms of national security must be defined by the executive through a policy. And I think the maintenance of economic unity of the country is also a matter of intervention. In case there is a failure, there is a collapse, there is a call from national parliament to be seized with that constitutional responsibility of taking the country in terms of intervention of what may happen in case the country is experiencing collapse economically, to maintain essential national standards. There is no way a national country cannot develop seamless national standards, and it is a call of this section of the Constitution that in cases where a province is unable to develop a certain policy provision, policy area, national is called to make such necessary intervention. Also to establish minimum standards required for rendering of service. It's quite important. that there are calls for constitutional intervention. It's depending then of how there is a policy prescripts law and drive from those that are given the responsibility to enunciate what kind of intervention.
That wasn't.
And I think when it comes to prevent unreasonable action taken by a province, which is prejudicial to the interest of another province or a country as a whole, the constitution in terms of intervention is quite clear. There must be no province that is taking the powers that are clearly defined to be of national importance or outside the constitutional parameters that are in conflict with the national constitution, that are in conflict or threatening a nearby province. All of those things are given a leeway by the constitution of how national government, national parliament must develop mechanisms of intervention. Therefore, this section of the constitution paints a clear picture of what an intervention scenario should be and reason for such actions. This helped to dispel the notion that intervention is interfering when an arm of the state in the performance, like including parliament, decides to take action against the executive authority when others will view the stated actions as interference of the executive functions. So these are the issues that we've been experiencing when it comes to either Section 100, either Section 139, the other structures of government taking these matters to court to say the province is usurping its constitutional existence to take powers of a municipality, to take powers of a council, to take powers of a department by another sphere of government. All of these defined constitutional roles are quite clear in this situation. And I wanted also to project the issue of the president and the national executive and what kind of interventions, what kind of constitutional intervention these bodies can do. This section, Chairperson, deals with the powers and functions of the president as the head of state as well as the executive. It empowers the president, for instance, to take or make decisions in line with the powers given to him or her by the constitution. One of the powers given to the president, for instance, is that of appointing the deputy president. That is a constitutional bestowed power to the president and the ministers, and assign their functions or assign the powers and may dismiss them. And I think we have seen in South Africa a situation where these powers have been exerted, and we have also seen ministers hired and fired, and some were taking these decisions to court. And all of these things are new changing of constitutional order. And others want the reasons why the president can fire me or why the premier can remove me or hire this particular individual. But the constitution accords certain powers to the head of state and head of government, which is the head of executive. If the president fires a minister or even deputy president for underperformance, for instance, or any reason for that matter, the president is doing that within his powers, as stated in this chapter of the Constitution. Interference to me, therefore, would be when the president wants to get involved in the day-to-day business of ministers' work, which is outside the scope of his work as the head of state. The moment you are proclaiming and assigning powers and functions to certain ministers as appointed, there is an expectation that a minister will develop policy in order to arrive at a determination of what the HOD will do and give certain powers to certain high leading hierarchy of administration in order to keep the decorum, the functionality, the role clarification, the authority, as well as the executing authority members. They will be in a position to get oversight reports and give a political strategic direction. That's, to me, the whole cause of the constitutional clarity when it comes to powers. Ministers and deputy ministers also, if I may also indicate that ministers and deputy ministers exercise oversight and leadership responsibility for their assigned portfolios. This is a call, this is a constitutional request. It's a determination arrived at that in each and every department and every board, there will be executing authority, there will be a board to define, to adopt policies, and the CEO will be in charge of the execution will be in charge of the implementation. And if the implementation is difficult, it is for that duty of that particular executive body to refer the matters for reconsideration by these individuals assigned, politically assigned, elected by the public, that there is impossibility of executing this kind of decision. And this is where sometimes these problems are emanating very strongly. And I think they have a full responsibilities as ministers, deputies, MECs, and premiers, a full accountability responsibility for the work performed by their various departments, provide reports to Parliament on the performance of their own departments, provide reports to Parliament on the performance of their department, plan and use of resources allocated to them. And it is their responsibility also to ensure that policies of government, financial and other resources allocated, are used for what they are meant for. And that is where the accountability lines are quite clear. That is where there must be a development of policies, there must be development of systems, and so that the lower level structure of government in terms of functional areas, your DDGs, your senior managers, your deputies, your assistants, your senior admin officers, admin clerks, understand that the hierarchy goes up to a level where the issues of financial, fiduciary duties, resource allocation are used for what they are meant to do. And it is their responsibility as well to intervene, underline, when things go south as political heads of the department, entrusted with a huge responsibility to ensure that the department perform their functions and deliver services to the public without failure. Then there is an expectation, chairperson and the leaders in this virtual platform, that a failure by a minister to monitor, to account, to oversight, to ensure that the targets set, the standards, minimum standards, and so on, are being met by those that are employed to execute, employed to operationalize that environment. He or she must be accountable for that. Ministers and deputy ministers are supported in executing their responsibilities. Underline, Chair, I'm saying they are supported in executing their responsibilities by appointed heads of departments. The heads of departments deal with the administrative as well as operation of the departments under the guidance of the political head, which is a matter that we have to exhaust and deal with. If the minister sees the department is failing to implement, for instance, a gender equality or a disability policy or a preferred procurement policy, she has a responsibility to intervene and ask the head of the department to adhere, because you are not an executing authority because you have to glorify a particular position and sit in government. You've got an oversight responsibility. The reason why they are called EAs, executing authorities, is because when there is a failure of adherence to policy, there is a call, expectation by public, expectation by the Constitution, expectation by law, that somebody who is failing to ensure that the gender equality, the disability policy, the preferred procurement policy are adhered to and implemented, he or she has that responsibility to intervene and ask the head of department. And I don't believe that will be called interference. To me, that will be intervention. And I think the moment that responsibility is called, it's quite clear. That doesn't fall under the interference. It will be classified as an interference, according to my understanding, only if the political head is prescriptive of who should be appointed as part of gender equality, disability, or even the preferential procurement policy. Once as the MEC or once as a deputy speaker, I know that we have to procure something called PPE, for instance. I now know who's supposed to benefit. I go to the Secretary of Parliament. Instead of saying, in terms of the preferred procurement policy, are the Black emerging contractors or emerging business people able to get something out of the policy provisions? And I instead go to that secretary and say, please, though they all qualified, but I need this one to be there. To me, that will constitute what I can term is a political interference. And I think chapter 6, when it comes to provinces, chairperson, moving quite quickly, the legislative authority of the provincial government is vested in the provincial legislatures. and have an oversight responsibilities as well for the provincial government. This section of the Constitution also details the functions of each, the legislature and the executive committees of council, which are called chaired by the Premier and members of the Executive Council. The powers of the Premier as the head of provincial executive, as well as the province. It also outlines when the provincial government can intervene in the local government. And I think, let me cite this because it's going to be important when we are speaking about interference and intervention. Local government is the most legislated sphere of government, for instance, and a complex one. There are various pieces of legislation like your Municipal Structures Act, your Systems Act, your White Paper on Local Government, and that also useful in providing guidance on issues of administration and governance in the local sphere of government, outlining the roles of the political leaders as well as accounting officials. Political interference in this instance, Chairperson, would only occur when a political leader operates outside the legal purview of the policy prescripts regulating how local government administration and governance should be run. And in most cases, allegation of political interference emanates when around issues of tenders that we all know, appointment of senior officials, and indeed it is interference when a political leader wants to be involved in the supply chain matters and appointments of staff, not unless it is provided for in the ministerial handbook or legislation, which allows leaders to make such an appointment. So you'll understand the collusion costs in our dispensation, where there is an interest in Section 57 managers, Section 56 managers. And I think if there was no framework that regulates this dispensation,
Your microphone is muted, presenter. I don't know what happened. Please check your mic again.
Okay.
Yeah, you're fine now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I was saying I want to give a just quick scenario of the legislation governing political intervention and prohibiting political interference in public service. In public service, it is divided into three spheres of government and are regulated by various pieces of legislation. National, provincial sphere are governed by the same set of legislation, with the exception of the local government. The head of the executive is the president, as I indicated. The political head of the department are also ministers and national departments, as well as MECs for the provincial governments. But the heads of administration are directors general, HODs or superintendent generals in the cases of provinces. And they are appointed by the president nationally and premiers at provincial level. In terms of their own reporting, they report to political office bearers of those departments and often referred to executing authority. And I think to clarify this point more, duties of a political office bearer in public service, which is the trust and the key element of why I decided to take this particular line. The duties of a political office bearer are well articulated, Chairperson, and captured in Section 3, subsection 1 of the Public Service Amendment Act 2007. And I think in summary, they are responsible for the overall function of the department, and they delegate some of their powers to the head of department. You will see in some instances where there is a problem between MEC, HOD, or MEC Superintendent General, there will be a possibility of certain powers taken away, for instance, from the accounting officer when it comes to appointments. For instance, I was the MEC in various departments. I knew that these conditions and public service amendments regulations were clear. At least I was starting from level 13 senior manager to appoint. Below that level, that was a delegation to the head of department or a superintendent general. What I was doing was to assist in the appointment, for instance, of the panel, which is a recommendation of the accounting officer. It is always important to keep the chemistry between the political authority as well as administrative accountability, so that you keep the decorum the space of operation, the support you're supposed to give as EA to that particular DG, to that particular superintendent general, or to that particular HOD, so that the effectiveness, the efficiency, the smooth system, the running of the department is solely dependent on this accounting officer, because you can't ask a question to an accounting officer if you have interfered with the process yourself as the political head of the department. And I think I must also cite the duties of the political head, as far as I can understand. The head of department shall be responsible for efficient management and administration of his or her department, including effective utilization and training of staff, maintenance of discipline, the promotion of sound labor relations, and proper use and care of the state property. These are the things that the HOD, the DG, and the CEO of any company are supposed to be seized with. And he or she shall perform these functions that may be prescribed. The head of department deals with the day-to-day operations of the department, including financial affairs. And they account now, because that's where the crux of the matter is. They account to the executive authority, the political office bearers, who in turn accounts to parliament or accounts to provincial legislature. The delegation power by this executing authority or head of department does not prevent him or her from exercising power personally. Relevant pieces of legislation, for instance, are quite clear: regulating political intervention and prohibition of political interference. I don't want to bore you about those things. It is quite clear that, for instance, as a member of council, as an elected representative, I don't have a duty and obligation over procurement. That is a sole responsibility of HOD, as well as procurement committees established. But I've got a reason and a duty and an obligation to ask a very critical question, because I can't conduct oversight for things that I don't know. MECs, presidents, deputies, premiers are supposed to be schooled in the legislative framework and arrangement of why they're supposed to conduct oversight, whether we speak about Public Service Act, Public Service Regulations, Public Service Amendments, DPSA, SMS Handbook, because these are the things that must be handy in the fingertips of those that are appointed and taking oath of office, including conditions of service. Remember, there are times of disputes which are referred to the executing authority for him or her to exercise such powers. And those are the things that will require a very well-astute, well-prepared, well-traveled, well-canvassed EA or MEC or deputy minister, and those that are leading at the national level. And as stated in my introduction, Chairperson, towards the end, the local government is a sphere of government that I think we all agree it is highly legislated. I'll attribute this on the very nature of how it is structured, and the crafters of this legislation, and I would assume, wanted to ensure that things are clearly stated for both political and administrative leadership in these institutions. Now let's look, for instance, at some of the pieces of legislation and snippets of what they say about subject matter we are now navigating through this evening. Section E, for instance, the political system. The white paper on local government often refers to as a mini constitution for local government. And according to this paper, Chair, the developmental municipalities will need to be guided by strong political leadership. This is what we're supposed to arrive at in South Africa after 20-something years of practical experience, able to make difficult policy judgments, work with a range of players, and guide the actions of administration to promote social and economic well-being of local communities. As part of this white paper I referred to, summarizes the key strategic roles and responsibilities of a political leadership in these spheres. 1, municipalities must, it's not a question of may or even asking, within the framework of or in accordance with the relevant pieces of legislations, including systems and as well as Structures Act, must. This act is saying specific roles and areas of responsibility for each political structure and political office bearers of a municipality and of a municipal manager. There is clear delineation of functions and roles of what these office bearers must do. The respective roles and areas of responsibility of each political structure and political office bearer of a municipality and the municipal manager must be defined in precise terms by the way of separate terms of reference in writing, Chair, for each political structure or political office bearer or a municipal manager, in order to avoid the conflation of responsibilities. A municipal manager, through a contract of employment and a contract that is expected from the council, which is the political structure, this individual must be given a clear way of saying, this is what we expect from you. You are given a 5-year contract. This is what we are going to evaluate your performance based on, and be acknowledged and be given effect in the rules, procedures, instructions, policy statements, and other written instruments of the municipality. If a municipality is only using its national wisdom, there is no clear procedure, there is no clear policy, there are no clear instructions, there is no clear statement, which is a clear statement would be a policy that is being delivered by that council in that year, whether after elections, the manifestos that are going to be followed. All of those policy injunctions are helping the institution to propel its functional areas to respond. And this section of the Municipal Systems Act clearly stipulates how a political office bearer can intervene.
Honorable Mlibo, you are frozen. Honorable Mlibo, you're frozen. I don't know if you can hear me. Honorable Mlibo. Colleagues, I will try to reconnect. In a minute. You'll be joining us in a minute. There is an internet challenges on his side. He'll join us in a minute. Apologies for that. He will rejoin us in a minute. In the meantime, please prepare your inputs, comments, questions, because he's about to wrap up. When he joins us, then we can go to a discussion. In the meantime, please prepare your questions. I'm saying, Honorable, we have lost Honorable Mlibo. He will join us in a minute. He'll be joining us in a minute. He's still resolving the issue of connectivity on his side. In the meantime, what you can do, colleagues, prepare your inputs, questions, comments, and then we can take it from there. In the meantime, please prepare your questions, input, and comments. He's joining us now. Honorable Mlibo?
Yes, I'm trying to connect now using the iPad, sir.
You are fine. We can hear you now. Thank you for
okay.
resolving the challenge. Now you are fine.
Sure. Just a minute then. Okay, thank you.
Colleagues, in the meantime, please prepare your inputs, comments, and questions that we need to engage on when he wraps up, Honorable Mlibo. On your side, please prepare your inputs, comments. Our topic today is still about political interference versus political intervention in the public service. In the meantime, please prepare your inputs, comments, and questions. Are you ready, Honorable Mlibo?
Well, Chairperson, though I was just about to conclude, I think part of what I will be making reference to will be born out of the questions that the members may pose, because I think my screen here has just blackout now. But I think I've tried to make a bit of understanding of whether these are the progressive healthy contradiction or retrogressive counter-revolutionary discourse for which I believe the issue of intervention versus the question of interference is quite clear. There is absolutely no way that at times they cannot coexist, but it depends on the legislative formula that each and every country, each and every institution, as well as every entity is supposed to manage this serious dichotomy, so that we don't necessarily impose ourselves whilst there is a policy direction, there is an issue of law, there is issue of policy, and act outside those particular confines, as I referred to as possible intrusion and the possibility of illegality. If I would like to have my individual person taking a particular responsibility. And the question of destructive nature of interference is well elucidated in the country. We have seen practical examples. And whether must we wait for a certain thing to collapse before we can make that particular intervention. So the proactiveness of interference as a positive step also need to be re-examined. And I think those are the areas which I believe are quite important. I think, Chairperson, on that note, let me pause for a moment so that I can just rejoin my notes via my cell phone. My sincere apologies for what has happened. I don't know, we're in East London and we didn't expect this to happen.
No, it's okay, it's okay. Honorable Mlibo, thank you so much for the presentation and for your submissions. Now we know that intervention is governed by the prescripts of law, including the Constitution. And as per submission of Honorable Mlibo, there is progressive intervention that is required when things are falling. There are times where one can do an intervention, and there are times where one can engage on interference. That's the submission that we have received from Honorable Mlibo. Without a waste of time, colleagues, I'll allow now members of this webinar, those who want to make inputs, comments, questions, raise up your hand. You will be identified, given space to make your input. Make it very short. Please switch on your video when you are making input. If possible, please switch on your video because we want to know who's talking. People must own up on what they're saying. We want to know who's talking. We don't want anonymous people to come and raise questions here. We want to know who's talking so that we can respond to a person. Now
maybe,
it's time for
maybe Chair, just before they can interact, because there's only one paragraph that I wanted to conclude by indicating, for instance, especially when it comes to, for instance, the functions of a speaker in a council, which is quite important. As we all know that all these pieces of legislation are giving authority power to be exercised. The Local Government Structures Act, for instance, referred to the office of the speaker, who presides over the council, refers to this individual as a constitutional created position in council. And I think the mayors also, which are another problem that always emanate between a speaker of council, who is a supreme chair of that council, and the executive mayor on the other side, who is also chairing the executive side and oversighting the administration. The mayor of a municipality, for instance, will preside at meetings of the executive committee. And I think there are a lot of references to that. What this act does, it clearly separates the functions of the speaker versus that of a mayor, as they both coexist in one institution called the municipality. It's quite a unique arrangement because there are clear separation of powers, provincial and national. But when it comes to a local government sphere, the mayor is in the council, the honorable speaker is presiding over there, and I think it always creates its own dynamic friction at times between the mayor and the powers vested and the delegation of original powers of law as against the Speaker, who is a supreme chair of that individual council. And it provides guidelines, for instance, regarding who has the authority over a municipality administration and accounts to council and other government structures on its behalf. The municipal manager, for instance, directly accounts to the mayor regarding day-to-day operations of your municipality, who in turn, the mayor accounts to the council presided over by the Speaker. And there will always be committees that are chaired by the Speaker, which also warrant the same accounting officer to account in council at the same time. And I think the Constitution, as well as local government pieces of legislation, provides clear guidelines regarding the roles of the political office bearers, municipal manager, who is also an accounting officer. And these pieces of legislation states their roles, functions, and powers. And they also provide for other levels of intervention from the MEC or the minister. So the law is quite clear according to where I'm standing as far as intervention is concerned. And anything short of it is an interference. And I would want to conclude by those few understandings. You'll recall what is currently happening in one of our municipalities in the province, where there is no municipal manager, where there is no speaker, but we can elect the mayor. These are the new things that we want to venture into in the theater of interference, intervention, and so forth. Thank you very much, Chair. Sorry for that.
No, it's okay. Thank you so much, Honorable Mlibo. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that last point. Colleagues, I am saying now is our time to make inputs, comments, and questions. Remember, the questions are not directed to the presenter. The questions are directed to all of us in this webinar. We're going to engage on those questions and find answers in those contradictions. So if you're posing a question, it is not directed to the speaker or the Honorable Deputy Speaker. It's directed to all of us in this webinar. So if you've got a direct question to the Deputy Speaker, maybe arrange a session next time so that you can direct that specific questions to him. For today, we are focusing on political interference versus political intervention in the public service. Colleagues, now is your turn to make inputs, comments, and questions. Please raise up your hand. I can see for the first round, we are going to take 5 hands in the first round and then take other hands in the next round. The first one to go, you'll go in that order. It's Kaya Molwa, Bongani M, Bongani M, Kaya Molwa and Bongani M. Those are only 2 hands that I can see for now. Kaya, you are the first one, followed by Bongani M. Kaya, you can go on, my brother.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. I've opened my video, but I don't see it displaying, but I hope that you can see it your side.
Yes, you're quite clear.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Let me hasten, Chairperson, to thank the presenter for this informative presentation. I just want to check a few things. That firstly, is interference always improper? That's my first question. Is it always improper? And secondly, how do we deal with an intervention in camouflage? Because we know that in some of the instances, some of these things, they come as an intervention and somehow it is interpreted as an interference. Then do we have any legislation or legislative framework to deal with that? And if that is the case, why is it so impractical for us as a country to act accordingly when there are some unnecessary interferences? Those are the things that I just wanted to check with the group. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kaya Molwa. You can switch off your video and lower your hand. Then we'll go to Bongani M. Bongani M. Your gadget says Bongani M284.
Yeah, thanks, Sediko. It's Bongani Mankeu. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah,
like
Bongani Mange. Yeah, Bongani Mange. Switch on
looks
your
like
camera, please.
my camera, I don't know. I try to switch it on, it doesn't come.
Okay, no, but you are safe because I know your face.
Oh,
Not,
at least. Okay, thanks, Sediko. Thanks, Honorable Deputy Speaker. Of course, I follow Kaya. Paradoxically, we get something else, and of which you say all these things that are somehow accommodated within the Constitution, and really you're very much adequate, and you're clear as to which sections of the Constitution. But in reality, we're getting the opposite. However, my sort of I'm trying to find out from you. I didn't really know the ambit of your presentation will go up to how far. Maybe then some questions might be a bit unfair, but therefore Sediko is saying this is a discussion amongst ourselves, not necessarily you. I think as we navigate the developmental state, what is critical with all whatever you call it, intervention, interference, it impedes the developmental agenda. And where it hits the most, in institutions that are instrumental to assist us to achieve such a developmental agenda, of which, of course, municipality is very fundamental. But what is very fundamental is institutions like SOEs that are within the departments, your ESCOM, your Transnet, your developmental finance institutions. I thought the interference in rand terms, that's where it hits the most, or whatever, interference or intervention, whether there's any confusion. Of course, as far as service delivery, it hits the most on the local municipality. So I thought we probably, maybe Sediko can allow us to somehow spend a bit of time trying to exhaust our thoughts as to what are critical issues of which at the local municipality, at the government level, you raise, you refer to constitutional sections. But what are fundamental critical problems within our SOEs where you really have real interest? The camouflage that he talks about, it's a camouflage that really impact all of us. For example, the debt at ESCOM, you go all our SOEs. Are we having issues around maybe shareholders compact? Do we have to do something? Are they accommodated within the Constitution? In the establishment of SOEs, what sort of constitutional clauses that we can refer to, and what makes us to do the opposite? Sediko, I can talk a lot about these things, but I think I just have to pause there. I thought what I'm bringing to you, Honorable, and the participant here is, from a service level delivery point of view, local municipality is very critical. I have no idea really what the provincial government does. If I were to be the head of state, I'll scratch off that thing quickly. But the local municipality, it's where issues are from a service level delivery point of view. But from a rand value impact of the economy, the interference or intervention, it hits us the most on the key instruments that are supposed to drive developmental agenda in South Africa, as a result, better lives for all. I'll pause at that point. I'm sorry for making a long input. I took an advantage that we're supposed to be 5, and then we're just 2. I hope I closed the gap of the 3 that couldn't talk. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Bongani. Thank you so much, Bongani. Who's there? Colleagues, if you want to speak, please raise up your hand. We're taking the last 3 hands for this round. If there are no hands, we'll then hand over to Mlibo. In the meantime, Honorable Qoboshiyane, you can
Yes.
respond to what you need to respond.
Thank you very much, Comrade Sediko. I think let me thank Kaya Molwa, I think, and Brother Bongani from that side. Interference, that is improper. Intervention in camouflage. For instance, let me just make a clearer example. I was the speaker of a local municipality myself in 2006. And at times, we can be tempted to use political problems of a political party concern and directly deposit those challenges to a sphere or to an operational institution in terms of the law called a municipality. There was an interest to intervene by putting, for instance, an administrator then in a municipality that hasn't collapsed necessarily, but because of political bickering and differences here and there, without developing any methods of intervention. So I can completely say there are intentional interferences where an authority at a certain level can make a determination to intervene, even if constitutionally there has never been a measure to measure whether it is time to take over that power, without mechanism being developed to say people are really about to be suffering from the state of collapse. They can drink water contaminated. The institutional finances have totally ruined. Therefore, there can be no operation. The entire council has come to stand still. And that may warrant a constitutional upper institution to make an intervention as defined in terms of the law. But when this can be used for other political nefarious reasons, as it was the case in 2006, I still believe and contend that that interference was improper. It was not an intervention. Indeed, it could not succeed because it could not even pass the muster of the court. There is also tortious interference. You can imagine a person who's supposed to be employed, competent, qualified, well-educated in a particular position. But because I've got a close proximity to someone who is lesser qualified, but because of proximity and position, he is part of my own faction, if I may use that term, and that individual will make things possible for me. And irrespective of whether the operational environment, this individual will be given this huge task and responsibility. And remember, our institution have collapsed internal training, internal what we call inductions. People are just taken to positions at times without the environment being conducive for the new entrants to understand there are tactical and technical areas when it comes to SOEs that you cannot simply draw any individual, no matter how you feel. So I'm saying these are tortious, if I may use that term borrowed from somewhere, tortious interferences at times that cannot help the situation, instead perpetuate the challenge. And there is what I believe at times wrongful interference. You simple, because I'm given a power to appoint from level 13 to level 15, and those are DDGs, those are senior managers, those are chief directors, and I know for a fact that I must appoint a committee that will come out with a product that is predetermined. And these are the areas, at times consideration of number of things, of course, but to interfere to an extent of not making an appointment if your individual doesn't make the grade. These are the issues which I believe, to me, are very far and distant from what we call intervention. And the issue of blackmail to induce, for instance, a contractor. These are the areas that we have seen. And I think we as South Africans are supposed to be, without fear, without contradicting ourselves, and because they neglect the entire population, they neglect interference. You do things knowing that they won't work, but as long as they satisfied your ego at times. And these are the institutions that's supposed to be a hope and beacon of the functional economic well-being of a state. And I think these are the areas for me which I believe are constituting a fundamental critical aspect that we need to re-examine as the people of South Africa. Surely there are improper methods at times that are applied when it comes to interference. And I think I've tried to make my thinking quite clear. Intervention, there is nowhere in the world where a government elected by the majority population through a ballot box, convinced by the policies and program of the party in power, that party cannot be given an authority to preside over the affairs of that nation in that period given that authority. Therefore, it means without 1994 interfering in terms of proper methods and legislation, intervening in terms of changing apartheid economic system and ushering in a constitutional democratic order. Therefore, will still be pre-1994. But what kind of interventions the state new democratic government has managed to achieve to take Black Africans in particular and in general to a level where there is a satisfaction of them playing a critical role in the discourse, economic empowerment, preferential procurement, issues of employment policies, because it was by design that they were excluded. It must also be deliberate that they are included. And to me, that intervention, which is constitutional, which is legislated, I think it's supposed to be protected by all peace-loving South Africans. And when it comes to issues of being glorified, moving forward, democratic slaves, it cannot continue such that majority of citizens of the country will always be crying for crumbs, whilst the cream of the economy, the cream of things and cream of decision, cream that are taken at boardrooms, we are still numerically very few to make a very serious dent to the vestiges of what we inherited. Therefore, intervention which is direct, intervention which is proper, not intervention under camouflage because you want to achieve a certain thing and you decide to say you have collapsed, I'm taking over, instead of saying you have collapsed, I'm prepared to use certain injunctions of the law to give support to this institution up until it is in a position to run its own affairs so that the whole country can still present a very functional democracy, small as we are when it comes to our contribution of democracy with other countries that are already achieving second decade of this important element.
Thank you so much for your response. There is a question here on the, let me just try to get some questions on the chat. The first question from Teku says, Honorable Mlibo, the appointment of the DGs and the HODs is the responsibility of the president and the premiers. What is your view on this arrangement in terms of strengthening the accountability for both ministers and the MEC? It's coming from Mteku. The other a question from Maria Efi. Political intervention sometimes is not clearly provided for in the law, especially in cases of disasters and emergencies such as floods. This is also used against politicians by the administrators when it suits them. It's the best option not to take all and sundry to establish structures such as MEICO and the council to resolve on matters legally instead of being found wanting and labeled as corrupt. My view, however, is that political and administrative dichotomy still requires a lot of attention. It's from A.C. Hermans.
Thank you very much, Marie.
From the Facebook, there was a question of, or a comment, that there's always a narrative that says power resides at Lituli, not at Union Building. And that kind of narrative, when you go to provinces also, the narrative will be saying power does not reside somewhere, then it resides in a provincial office of the organization that is governing. When you go to the regions, that will be the same narrative. But then when you go to the wards, the political party that govern that ward will be saying power resides at the branch level, not with the ward councillor. You see that as political interference or political intervention by the branches, the regions, the provinces, and even a national political party giving mandate to their deployees. That's the question that comes, and I'm summarizing it. Let me just look at other comments on the hands that are there on the webinar. There are no hands for now. It means you were clear for all colleagues. Maybe you can comment on those three submissions that I've made now.
Thank you very much, Sediko. From Mr. Mteku, let me also thank him for the question, as well as Effie, Comrade Maria. I know he's a stalwart of local government and a former speaker herself. Thank you very much. Sorry for disclosing that in case I'm arrested. But the president has got constitutional powers to appoint certain categories of public servants in this country. It's known. he is exercising that power at times in conjunction with the National Assembly. You will understand that there are various boards of certain entities in this country. I just forget the schedule, where the interviews are conducted by the members of parliament, multi-party, so to speak, and make such recommendations to the head of state, the president, who has been given assigned clearly defined powers to make such an appointment. And there are certain, like directors of public prosecutions, which also the appointment of judges. We all know that the JSE is always interfacing with that and making recommendations to the head of state for president to assent and agree with that appointment. Therefore, it means the South African instrument have got a regulation of managing the balance between the executive authority as well as legislative institutions like parliament, meaning that those that are representing the people have got a way of ventilating their own views on the candidates. And in South Africa, these things are made public. You've seen what has happened, for instance, in US, a president venturing into firing of certain judges and magistracies, and because that power is vested in him. But in South Africa, it's a concurrent function at times that a certain jurisdiction will perform a particular function, make a recommendation, and the president will choose and appoint that individual. Therefore, the synchronization of authority and power in South Africa, political parties are contesting elections. Political parties are putting their manifestos to the society, to public, to choose on the date of election. It is expected and incumbent upon those parties to ensure that they develop their own internal mechanisms like monitoring and evaluation, because after 5 years, for instance, it is the ANC that must account of whether we've managed to achieve things that we said we are going to achieve. And it is therefore reasonable to expect that they will have a direct interest in how the country is being run. But the fortunate part in South Africa is that the president of the African National Congress, in terms of our own national conference decisions, will become the president of the country by election. Remember, parliament is constituted to elect the president. Parties can field their candidates. That president is also a president of the party. And I think, to me, that is a convention that South African unique situation, because we don't have presidential direct elections. We've got party political lists as well as party political colleges that are giving the list of candidates that are going to be put by the IEC for objection in case the public can say, we don't approve of this particular name. Therefore, when it comes to policy direction, it is expected that the ANC will always have a keen interest at Lutuli to see that we have said we are going to transform economy in this particular fashion. We are going to drive socio-economic development in this particular fashion. This is what we are going to do about issues of land, property relations, and so on. Therefore, the members who are taken to executive for the implementation of the manifesto of the ruling party is expected to be monitored by an institution called those trustees that are at Lutuli. Of course, without interference, but with certain interventions, because we've got media evaluations like national general councils, provincial general councils to say, but we are deviant from this area. We have a detour from this direction. Can you please, comrades, come to this level? In case this particular policy decision is difficult to implement for now because of what has happened, for instance, COVID, that was unplanned, go back to the structures, NGCs, and so on, and say, comrades, we took this decision under a certain condition, but it is now this reality. How then can we go forward? So I'm trying to say there is a direct link between the ANC in government and the ANC outside government, because this is one party, one policy, one direction over the term. I think that's what I can say. Of course, Maria, you are quite correct. I totally agree with you. For instance, now we're in a state of disaster. It's declared, it's known. Everything is subsumed by this law. No matter what we normally do in our own daily lives, but there is a constraining environment because this legislation empowers the state to make certain determinations, things that we can do, the resource direction and how decision can be taken. There is a national, for instance, disaster committees that are there that are dealing with every day-to-day situation. That's why we are updated by committees of ministers instead of what we normally know conventionally, that we will account to the legislature, NCOPs and so on. But all those reports will be processed in cabinet by the president, supposed to be the face leading during this critical moment. So I totally agree that there are instances of that nature as we are now gravitating towards new situations that we never experienced before.
Thank you so much, Honorable Mlibo. The question that comes from Advocate Sepanya Mohale says, thank you for the crucial topic. Honorable Qoboshiyane, what then went wrong in Tshwane? How was the province supposed to deal with the situation there? What then went wrong in Tshwane? But before you answer that, you are correct. The president is empowered by the law to make certain decisions. The example is, one example also is coming to Chapter 9 institutions. All the Chapter 9 institutions, they are interviewed by Parliament and make recommendation to the president for appointment. So the president is empowered by the constitution by the law to make certain decisions. We'll go back to Bongani to make some inputs, then hand it over to you. Then we're about to close.
Okay. Well, I'm not being
sorry. Before you come in, Honorable Mlibo, let's give Bongani a chance to say something. Then you'll wrap up. Bongani and Kaya Molo.
Thanks, Sediko. Just two things, Honorable Speaker. We're very clear that the executive or department, to an extent, is overseen by portfolio committees in Parliament. What is it that we're not getting right there? Particularly when you look at the areas of technical nature, like your trade and industry, your finance, those type of areas. So what is it? As a result, you'll find that the executive, the minister, is just running rogue. That is one. Two, with the proposition that you are making, the president the Parliament recommend the board to the president. The president appoints. The judges are appointed. That makes a lot of sense. Now, hypothetically, what we are hearing from the state capture that Machela Koko was fired by the president, the deputy president. Say if that is true, can we define that as unhealthy interference to the affairs of Eskom by an executive head? In this case, the deputy president, who goes and fire an executive passing through the board, through the minister. So can that be called an unhealthy interference by the current state president? I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bongani. Let's go to Kayamolo. Remember, all the questions are not directed to Honorable Qoboshiyane. All of us, we can respond. Feel free to raise up your hand and respond on the questions that are raised by fellow colleagues. Kayamolo? Mulawa?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you are very correct. It's Mulawa.
Sorry for spelling your name wrong.
Okay, no problem, Chair. Chair, mine is to say, in the country, we are faced with service delivery actions that are in their own shape, taking us aback in terms of development. And these service delivery actions are as a result of inadequate service delivery sometimes, as one may observe, they are just ill-informed by political competitions that exist between political parties. But my question in essence is, if there is any legislation that grants
It's demanding their fathers now.
Sorry for that.
Okay, Chair. So if there is any legislation that prescribes the mechanism for an intervention. What is it that we're failing at, that we don't seem to be intervening, or whoever rests or resides in the office? Why are we failing to intervene when there is lack of service delivery, when there is inadequate or mismanagement of public resources? Why are we not seeming to be intervening if there is legislation governing that? Secondly, Chair, in the department that I'm serving was once subjected to be under administration. The national office took over that department. And to my understanding, once that happens, one was expecting things to change for the better. But the status quo remained, or things became worse. So what then becomes of that higher office when intervening? And instead of observing any improvement, you find that things are getting worse. Where are we actually failing as a nation? That's just what I wanted to raise, based on the fact that there are legislation that are governing that. And what becomes of that office in terms of accountability, where you intervene as an MEC, to make an example, in a particular instance, and things become worse under your supervision now as a political head. What becomes of your position in terms of accountability? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You can take over, Honorable Qoboshiyane. Thank you so much, Kaya. Thank you so much, Bongani. And thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you very much. I think it was Advocate Mokhanya, if I'm right.
Mokhale.
Oh, sorry. Well, for instance, I'm not closer to what is happening in Tshwane, but what I know is that we've got a new situation which South Africans are not normally well clued up with, this new political setup, hand municipality, for instance, coalition politics. I don't remember, for instance, in my party, exhausting a discussion when it comes to how are we going to define a compromise kind of an institution going forward. If you go to many countries in Europe, there are hanged parliaments. There was a delay, for instance, to confirm Chancellor Merkel as a leader in Germany, because in them, they're supposed to sit down with all the parties that think alike and say, on behalf of society that we serve, no matter how we can differ, but we are all serving as political parties at the behest of our own people. And the compromise position for Tshwane, the capital of the Republic, it will be this particular area. And unfortunately for now, South Africa is still pigeonholed in highly invested party political traditions. And therefore you can see how we can then compromise not our parties, but the communities that are supposed to stand to benefit from the proceeds of their own freedom. And I think it's a question of saying this is going to be a new normal, like these virtual platforms. There is a reality that now we need to understand. Even majority parties can be caused in Nelson Mandela Metro. We are ANC in charge of the province nationally, but the mayor is not from the party. Then how are we going to conventionally arrive at a determination to say, these are the things that we can compromise for the sake of the people within the confines and the boundaries of that institution? And I think it's the capacity that we need to derive, it's a capacity that we need to engender, so that the new political leadership understand that there will be instances where there is a difference of one person between the parties. And how are we going to take a decision to pass a budget in case one is not present in the council, but the council is correct because members are here? But the question is, we are rooted with our heels fixed on the land. Nobody is prepared to move an inch. It requires a very elevated leadership to say there must be a compromise that is reached, as we have done in 1994 and co-opted some of the worst enemies of our revolution, so that we can pacify everything and go through a new state and dispensation. So I think for me, I don't know, the comrades in Tshwane may be seized with this situation, but it is true that we need to find new friends who are aligned politically, understanding where we are coming from, where we are, and where we are destined to go. And I think the moment we arrive at that, it will be better for us going forward, because we can't claim the same space all by ourselves. Service delivery actions, the issue of intervention when it comes to inadequacies. Comrades, it is a fact. When we are intervening in a lower level institution, the intention at times is not to take over the authority, but because there are constitutional provisions like Section 154, a provincial government to give support. There might be times where there is a financial inefficiency or deficiency or skill, engineering and technical, they cannot source appropriate and adequate skills. It is the duty of the government, because we're one government operated differently, to say this is what we can do and support. And before we can go to Section 139(1)(c), dissolve, or 139(1)(b), we are taking over, putting an administrator. You must first go through these sections of support, Section 139(1)(a), to say, well, if you are unable to perform this particular function, you are weak in human resources, you are weak in finances, you are weak in this and that, or business and so on, I will provide or give you a directive. Appoint this person, because this municipality cannot proceed without a town planner, for instance, without an LED specialist, for instance, so that you need to broaden the income of the municipality for services to be rendered. These are the calls of a leader at the higher level to say, before I can go and take over, there are people employed there. Yours is not to feather and ruffle the feathers, rather to say we are together to promote the economic well-being of this municipality. We want to affirm skill, we want to transfer resources, we want to transfer even investors that can come. That's the duty of the upper structures of government, so that we don't have a big brother approach, but a complementary strategy of ensuring that 257 municipalities and our metros are at least performing at the desired outcomes for everybody to understand where we are. And I think, to me, if we can do that, the capacity of the province, I must be honest, leadership, at times we do have advisors at other spheres of government, specialists that can advise MEC, minister, deputy ministers, resources that cannot be at the disposal of certain local municipalities or districts, because the core mandate is to deliver water and reticulate those water to the taps of the communities. So if you populate your structure beyond a certain percentage, therefore you are non-compliant. So I believe in the new nature of a single administration of the country, where you can tap from a national government, you take a person to a municipality to operate over a period of time, you give a contract for that person, competent, qualified, knowing what the task at hand is all about. I think South Africa will be a better state in terms of administrative efficiencies and so on. I think that's the contribution I can make when it comes to issues of inadequate interventions, whether they are negative or positive. The last one, may I not directly answer this one, because it's a matter that I know is being considered elsewhere. But I think, as far as I know, Mr. Machela Koko is a qualified, competent engineer. Well, I was going through his CV. He understands the operations of that area. I may not know what were the causal factors for anything that will call him out, whether it was underperformance or it was totally whatever area that a particular individual makes a determination to say he must be moved. May I, with due respect, not delve into that particular space, at least for now, up until we see him going back to the commission, I think on the next coming few days. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. Ntate Johnny Mhlala, your hand was up. Please come in. Ntate Johnny Mhlala. Your hand was up.
No, Comrade Sediko and other comrades. I just wanted to make a slight addition to what Comrade Honorable Mlibo adequately penned out, and actually put more emphasis on the situation in Tshwane and try to make sense of the difference between interference and intervention. You see, for me, intervention should be backed by legislation. And if at local government level, the MEC of Kokta at the province is expected to be the one that comes with the intervention. And we have seen this in Tshwane. There are two tests that the intervention must pass. One, the intervention must be appropriate. Two, it must be rational. That simply means that there was no any other thing that one could have done except apply Section 139(1)(c). Now, in the situation in Tshwane, where the case of the provincial executive was found wanting, was in that in the prayer
We are losing you, Comrade John Mthatha. We are losing you. Find your network.
they relied on happened at the time. Hello?
Hello, we can hear you now. Hello, we can hear you now.
Yeah, man, it's these people going on phone gonna go wrong. But that does it mean? Now, what I'm trying to say is that if it's intervention, you can only intervene in a situation if you have regulated what is expected of the level of intervention. In other words, unless a local government structure has been forewarned on what is expected of it by the MEC, any intervention by the MEC will be viewed as interference. In particular, in areas where the MEC and the people in running the administration do not share political allegiance. Now, related to that, comrades, is the fact that our strategic political enemies in the form of the DA do not believe in the rule of law, but rather believe in the rule by law. They will take you to court for almost anything that does not favor them. Let me give you an example of Tshwane. In Tshwane, the combination of the ANC and the EFF is the majority of councillors. But even if the two come together, they cannot exercise that majority in council because the speaker will simply refuse to move the thing to a situation where there is a vote. Now, in their frustration where they cannot use their majority, they end up staging walkouts, which then paints them in a very ugly fashion. Now, political intervention, even at the party political level, if you are a member of the African National Congress, you will know about democratic centralism. But democratic centralism applies only if the decision that has been taken by the higher structure has been fashioned from the bottom going up. If each and every member that is affected by that decision was given an opportunity to participate in the process of that decision being taken, then democratic centralism applies. Otherwise, any other form is dictatorship of the elite. You sit in a smoke-filled room there and take a decision and push it down under the cloak of democratic centralism. Now, those are some of the, without sounding very insidious and sophist, Comrade Sediko, I'm not the presenter. The presenter is Honorable Mlibo Qoboshiyane, and I think he's more than equipped enough to deal with these intricate issues. I'm less qualified to do that. So let me rather stop here before I make a fool of myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Comrade John Mthatha. You are highly gifted and have information in dealing with these issues. The other question comes from Makasi on the chat box. It says, can the Honorable Speaker provide us with clarity on the question of constructive intervention versus disruptive intervention, probably narrowing it down to the level of local government sphere. Also, how will he define what is currently happening in the Nelson Mandela Bay Council, whether that requires political intervention from the province, or what does the policy say when such issues happen? The other questions from Lulega, Simon Zele says, Honorable Speaker, can we have a debate in Parliament and invite MPEC and whips? There is serious interference and understanding my apology. I'm disturbed while I was writing, but there's a let me read it again. Honorable Speaker, can we have a debate in Parliament and invite MPECs? There is serious interference. Most of the municipalities are not complying, and MPEC is sidelined and isolated. From Luleka Simon Zele again, what happened if we were advised wrongly in certain decisions? Let's leave it there. But before you come in, Honorable Mlibo, on the issues of coalition government, one day we'll organize a debate around coalition government, the politics of coalition government. And in Africa, we'll use Lesotho as our case study and ask a question: how stable are the coalition government? As a society, we should not be celebrating coalition government because we've got an example in Lesotho whereby the coalition governments are not stable. So they remain unstable for years. So Lesotho has been having challenges with issues of coalition government. We must always, no matter how hard we feel, support the issues of democracy where majority takes on. We should appreciate that. Because in coalition government, you end up spending much of your time managing egos and personalities instead of delivering services to the people. You can spend the whole 5 years negotiating on who must become a mayor or who must become a speaker, while the people on the ground need services. So one day we'll organize a debate on the issues of the coalition government and the sustainability of coalition government, taking Lesotho as a case study. But before I waste a lot of time, you can wrap up, Honorable Mlibo, then we are closing.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sediko, once again. And thank you very much to those that are following on Facebook. I can confirm that indeed many of the Eastern Cape comrades and those that are interested in the discussion and the topic are really interested in this topic. But I think Mr. Marcus, if I'm correct, I think he was concurring with a number of areas. And I suppose the practical examples of these new coalitions, as I indicated, for instance, in South Africa, this is a new phenomenon. You sleep with a mayor today and tomorrow it's something totally different. It therefore means we have just arrived at a state of unpredictability. You don't know if there is no new arranged regulation and formula in those institutions where there is no party that has sufficiently arrived at 50+1% for sufficiency of taking decisions. It tells you that what are the mechanics of running a municipality where there is no outright winner in South Africa? And I think this is a very serious, well-considered debate that South Africans need to take. And to me, it's supposed to be led by the African National Congress. You know why? Wherever there is a hanged municipality or coalition, ANC will always be one of the biggest majority there, as well as the coalition of the opposition parties. And now, if we can't manage those egos, if I may say, those political interests, and you can see that it is difficult to run a minority government, because tomorrow they will cohere those that are in majority and try to unseat the honorable speaker. And because of the vested powers in the speaker to convene, remember, this is a constitutional design position. It's not just a person sitting there, but it is the authority that is given to the person called the chairman of council, the chairperson, who is the speaker. If she or he is not in that seat at a particular moment, that calls for court to make an interpretation, and which is a very, very serious situation. For instance, there are structures that are designed in terms of the law in council. You've got a caucus. All parties are supposed to engage in caucus sessions in order to distill the agenda, the allocations of time. the issues to be deliberated. And the chief whip, which is always coming from the majority party, will always lead the discussion or will indicate the issues of motions for the day. That is structural created entity. All municipalities with above 40 councillors can have a chief whip. But where there is no such a position, or councillors are falling short of that number, there is no full-time chief whip in council, which means that chief whip maybe will be from a ruling party of a majority, but can't have the powers and authority that are given to a full-time chief whip of council. It therefore means there must be a persuasion of party political leaders to say, before the council sit, let's go and have a discussion separately so that the council becomes smooth. There are areas where we think we can converge. There are areas where we are digressing. And it is up to a well-managed caucuses of council where we can say, this matter we don't agree. Can't we defer it for another day for purposes of taking compliance issues and the first issues that are concerning the communities, so that those things don't fall in the cracks of divisions. But I think, to me, it's a call of leadership of African brothers and sisters. The second structure, which is important, which is defined in terms of the Structures Act, is EXCO, the executive part of council. The moment that in that structure there is coherence, the mayor, the MMCs, those directors reporting to these MMCs, and the briefing properly, analyzing reports, preparing reports to council, everything in council will be smooth because the mayor will be taping things that have been managed to be investigated, issues of finances, the state of finances, the state of collection of garbage and so on, the staffing issues and so on, so that the council is well abreast about issues. The moment those issues are raised from the floor and there is no one who can stand up in council strong enough with authoritative voice, then you can see the dissensions of opinions. The third issue is the council itself, the council body. Do we have competent, I'm not saying qualifications in terms of academic qualification, people who understand that they've been elected in trust by communities to dispense decision on their behalf, people who can go to the communities, draw these lessons back to council and say, in our agenda, we can't conclude not knowing what is happening in ward so and so. So a preparation of a ward report based on the offices of the speaker at times, or the executive mayor whose laws are allowing him to be the champion of what we call public consultations in some instances. But there is a fourth area which is not regulated by any law of the factions. The difficulties that we can see in number of institutions that are supposed to take certain decisions timeously is because there will be this bickering because another faction disagree with this particular appointment and so on, which I believe are intra-party issues that are also affecting the forward trajectory of that institution. And I think whether the Johnny Mhlala, yes, Mhlala, appropriate intervention, rational, I totally agree. Any intervention to an institution that is constitutionally created supposed to be appropriate, is supposed to be rational, because every decision that you take as an MEC is subjected to administrative law for review by court of law. So I always believe a council must be informed. A council must be one requesting at times, delivering or deliberating on issues of terms of reference, because constitutional, you can't simply take powers of a constitutional created entity only because you've got that power to do so. There must be demonstration of procedures and processes before, such that when you go to court, you can prove that there was absolutely nothing else left for you to intervene. So there must be legality, there must be appropriateness, there must be rationality in all actions that we do, because you must always prove that this municipality is totally in a state of decay, in a state of collapse. It can't run its own affairs, and it has totally ruined the lives of the people. And I think, to me, that will be called a rational, appropriate intervention to say and prove. And communities must also be consulted. They must know that indeed there is now a point of making such intervention. When it comes to Nelson Mandela issue, it's quite a tricky situation. There is no outright winner in Nelson Mandela Metro, and it depends now on the parties themselves, on the leaders leading those parties, on the party leaders, on the caucuses that can manage the situation. It's not difficult. The councillors in Nelson Mandela Metro are 120. you need 50 plus 1 for decision to be taken. And you can get those numbers amongst those same comrades or councillors. Therefore, it means the majority parties I know are 2, which is African National Congress and DA. And all other parties, depending on the mastering of politics, mastering of developmental direction, mastering of whose interests are we really serving? Can't you draw that strength from those smaller parties for you to cohere and give strategic leadership and direction possible, in this case as African National Congress? And to me, this is highly possible. It's the question of going to our drawing board and say, are we going to allow that situation, that schism, that hatred to superimpose itself over people of rational thinking, over business communities, over people that are expecting services? And I believe it's the question of cool minds that are going to take that municipality forward. And I think the issues of rule of law are quite important for me. No matter what intervention you do, you must base that on the constitution, on the law that is applicable. And by so doing, consultation is quite important. Chairperson, I think on that note, I can agree with a number of comments made. Simon Zele on the issue of MPEX and issues of interference. I know that is an institution, that is a body, a committee established in council in order for it to review certain expenditures, irregular expenditure, unauthorized, as well as wasteful expenditure. To me, that is a body that is well prescribed in terms of rules of council to do competently and call certain MMCs and managers to account about the kind of expense, whether quarterly, whether half-year reports, or even annual reports. Therefore, at times, people that are normally taken to that committee are having difficulties when they are making recommendations, for instance, for decisions to be taken against certain managers because of transgressions or lack thereof of doing things they were supposed to do. I think on behalf of the legislature, these are the things that we can consider, because in the Eastern Cape, we do have what we call a memorandum of understanding with SALGA structures in the province, working with the local government sphere. So we can also extend invitation to MPEX, for instance, so that we can have an idea of why there is difficulty for these created statutory bodies to perform their functions. But I totally agree that there is a reason why the public accounts committees have been established in order for finances of municipality, the stability and the healthiness of municipalities are supposed to be measured, are supposed to be followed up, because that body is created for only that expectation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Honorable Mlibo. Colleagues, in the absence of hands, comments, I think we have reached the end of our session today. I can see that there's a lot of interest in this topic, and definitely for sure, we will make sure that next year after the local government elections, we'll visit this topic again, invite the new mayors of that time and the speakers, and also bring in Honorable Mlibo to come and unpack it again. So the target at that time will be, those will be the mayors at that time of the local government elections and the speakers. So 257 mayors, including the ones from the metros and their speakers. We sit here and we discuss issues of political interference and political intervention. Ours is to ensure that outside politics, people get services. Our political differences should not hinder service delivery. Our difference in political ideology should not hinder provision of water, electricity, health services, education, and all these basic services. We might differ politically in terms of ideologies, but the people themselves of this country must get services. The people of this country must have economic empowerment. The people of this country must have job opportunities, irrespective of our political ideology. From our side, as Progressive Socio-Economic Investment Institute, we want to thank you, Honorable Mlibo Qoboshiyane, for accepting our invite. And you are part of the family now. You will be invited to many of our sessions that we are holding. To all the members of who joined the webinar, we thank you for your participation. You are also adopted members of this family now. you are part of us. So we expect you in other activities that will be heavy going forward. We thank you, Honorable Mlibo.
Yes.
Yeah, from our side, we will be